All right, now let's talk about colors. In CSS, we have a few different ways to represent colors. We can use named colors, RGB values, HSL values, and hexadecimal values. Let's see this in action. So I'm going to define a div with the class of box. Now, let's define a role and give our box a width of 200 pixels, a height of 200 pixels, and a background color. Now, open up Google and search for color picker. So here in Google, we have a built-in color picker, but pretty much every design tool also has a color picker. So over here, we can move this pointer around to select a different color. Now, over here, look, as we move the pointer around, these values get updated, right? So what are these values? Well, let's look at RGB first. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So RGB is short for red, green, blue, and these three values represent the degree of red, green, and blue. So each value can be a number between 0 to 255. Now, you don't have to memorize any of this stuff. All I want you to understand is that this color that you can see over here can be represented by a combination of red, green, and blue according to these values. So if we copy these values, and then over here, we can use the RGB function to set the background color. So we paste the values, save the changes, and here's what we get. Now we have another function called RGBA, which is short for alpha. So with this function, we can supply an extra value, and this value can be a decimal number between 0 and 1. 0 means completely transparent, and 1 means completely opaque. So if we use a value like 0.5 here, our box is semi-transparent. So if you have something underneath, like an image, that image will be visible. This is a very popular technique we use in CSS. So RGB is one way to represent this number, but we can also represent it using the hexadecimal system. Hexadecimal is one of the many numerical systems. We have the binary system that contains the digits 0 and 1. We have the decimal system that contains the digits 0 to 9, and this is the system that we use to represent numbers. Hexadecimal is another system that contains the digits 0 to 9, as well as the letters A to F. We can represent any number in the world using any of these systems. Now, the actual mathematical concepts behind this is irrelevant here. You don't need to learn them. But let's look at a practical example. Look at this hexadecimal value. Here we have 6 characters, and every 2 characters represent one of the numbers in the RGB system. So E6 is the hexadecimal representation of 230 in the decimal system. As another example, CD is the hexadecimal representation of 205 in the decimal system. That is the concept behind this. So instead of using an RGB value, we can use a hexadecimal value. So we copy this and paste it over here. Here's what we get. Now, the limitation of hexadecimal system is that here we don't have the transparency channel. So if you want to make this box semi-transparent, we have to use the RGBA system. Another system for representing colors on the web is the HSL system, which is short for hue, saturation, lightness. Once again, we have 3 values here. The first value is the degree of the color on a standard color wheel. So look over here. Here we have a standard color wheel. That degree determines the tone of the color. Is it blue, red, green, or what? The second value is the percentage of the saturation, which can be a number between 0 to 100. So as we increase this value, our color becomes more saturated. Let me show you what I mean. So over here, if I move this pointer to the left, our color is less saturated, right? And now look, the saturation is reduced to 65%. The third value is the lightness. So as we increase this value, the color becomes brighter. And as we decrease it, it becomes darker and gets closer to black. Some people prefer the HSL system because they can pick the color shade and then play with these 2 numbers to create different shades of that color. So as an example, let's copy these values. And then over here, we're going to use the HSL function and paste these values. Just remember to remove the degree character because this is not a valid character in CSS. So save the changes. Here's what we get. Now, if we increase the saturation and let's say make it 100, our color is more saturated. We can also reduce the brightness and make it, let's say, 40%. And here's what we get. So this is the HSL system. Now, similar to RGB, we have a variation of this system that is HSL-A, which is short for alpha channel. So we can supply a force value here, which can be a decimal value between 0 to 1. If you want a semi-transparent box, we can use a value like 0.5. Now here in Chrome, we also have a color picker. Let me show you. So let's inspect this element. Here's the background color. Currently, we're using the HSL system. We can click on this box and see this color picker here. So I prefer this shade, that's better. Now over here, we can see the individual values, 53 for hue, 93% for saturation, 51% for lightness, and 1 for alpha, which means completely opaque. Now, if we change these values here, our CSS is not updated. So here we have to press enter to accept the values. Now we can copy this and paste it in our CSS. Now look, here's another way to represent HSL values. So instead of separating these values using commas, we have 53 degrees, 93%, and 51%. So this is all about color systems. Now, which system is the best? There is no such a thing. Depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different answer. But in my experience, most people prefer the hexadecimal system because it's shorter and more compact. But of course, RGB and HSL have their own uses.